Climate impacts coffee, just maybe not the way that you think. In this Q&A video, Matt Kelso from Sagebrush Coffee is sharing how recent weather phenomena affect coffee growing in Guatemala, Colombia, and Costa Rica. So Matt, for this video, I really want to focus on the chronological progression of what you noticed, but before we get into that, why don't we talk about the generals? So what did you notice about climate in these countries?
Well, I mean, as you think about climate and just as you think about the different coffee growing regions, they really are impacted, and you kind of think like it's close to the equator, it's got a tropical climate, and so they have very distinct rainy and dry seasons. And that was obvious in all three countries. And really kind of the crux of what the concern was in those countries was, hey, our dry and rainy seasons are kind of changing. We're trying to figure out how to respond to that. And so it all came down to like the temperature's always the same. So
Sure.
It's really like, when is it wet and when is it dry? And how does that impact the coffee crop?
Guatemala was the first place that you went to. What were you noticing there?
I remember so vividly a trip on a side-by-side with Don Edwin, and we were driving just across his property, and he showed us different wells and ways that they were collecting water. And he started to go down like a conversation around how climate change is affecting the way they're thinking about water. And what he said was, you know, he's owned the farm for, I think his dad has owned it for like 70 years. So he's been involved in this farm his whole life.
Yeah.
And so he was noticing that in recent years, the rainy season's ending early and doesn't seem to have as much water as he's used to. And so he didn't call it a drought, but it kind of feels like a drought to him.
Sure.
And as that's starting to happen, his concern was, if these wells run dry, we can't water the crops throughout the entire season, and we won't actually have a crop because we won't have enough water to nourish the coffee trees.
Sure.
And so I asked some follow-up questions around that, and I was like, well, what are you going to do?
Right.
And he's like, well, we monitor our water levels, and if we see that we're going to run out of water, which he said hasn't happened yet, but they have a plan in place. He's like, if we see that we're about to run out of water, we're going to focus on the higher quality coffees, make sure that those get the water they need, and kind of let some of the lower value crops kind of just not get nourished as well, sell them as sea market coffee and be done with it.
Wow, that sounds like that could be pretty huge for everybody in the chain if that happens.
Yeah, because you lose that like middle of the road, really what a lot of people call blenders, or like, you know, that middle of the road coffee that is priced for the masses, basically.
Right.
You just lose that whole portion.
And for somebody who likes to roast specialty beans at home, I'm assuming that's going to skyrocket the price on specialty coffee, right?
Yeah, I would expect it. I mean, it's just simple supply and demand. If
You're
supply
right.
goes down and demand stays level, something's going to flex.
So Guatemala, it's an issue of the rainy season starting late and there not being as much water. Was it like that in Colombia?
No, in fact, it was almost the exact opposite.
Okay.
So I'm walking with Jairo, who owns Man Export, and we were walking through a farm, and he was talking about how it hasn't stopped raining in like 3 or 4 years.
3 or 4 years.
And that they don't have a dry season right now.
Wow.
And so he was talking about all of the impacts, and I was asking about the impacts, and he's like, some of it is just the dampness. I'm like, that has to cause mold or something to grow on the trees, right?
Sure.
Like, it can't, if it's always damp, like that's a perfect environment for some of these bacteria and molds and leaf rust to just grow. And he said, yeah, some, but ultimately, which this was a surprise to me, he's like, ultimately, like a coffee tree needs stress to be able to produce good fruit.
Really?
And what he meant by that was it needs a time where it's starved of water, gets a lot of sunlight, and that causes the like sugars to like basically go into themselves and focus on producing really strong fruit. And so for the cherries to grow the way we expect them to, it actually needs a season of no water, and they're not getting that right now.
So they're just getting constant water.
Yeah, they may get
way
like
long-
a day or two, but not like the typical like weeks of dry.
So it's not just intensity, but it's also frequency is the issue.
Yep.
Yeah, because I think when I think about it, it would seem like more water isn't a bad thing, but you need a certain level
You need the level of stress. And when I say this, like if you've never been to Origin, when they talk about a rainy season, it's different than like in Arizona when it rains, it just rains. Maybe it's more like Arizona, different than South Carolina where I grew up. But for them, like when you go to Costa Rica and you're in the rainy season, it's like you could set your watch to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It rains for like 3 hours. And so raining is not like it rains constantly, but it rains every day for some period of time. Or even it like drizzles and is overcast, and it may not be raining that whole day, but you're not getting the sun to provide that stress.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, and so in Guatemala, it sounded like they were kind of unsure of exactly what to do, but they were anticipating an issue.
Yeah.
Colombia, this has been having a couple of years. So what are they doing currently?
So I had that conversation with Jairo. I've also talked to other producers from Forest Coffee about the similar thing, and they both made a similar adjustment. But it really comes down to year-round picking.
Year-round?
As opposed to seasonal. So if you look at, like in Guatemala, for example, their picking season is like 4 or 5 weeks. And that's the time when the cherries are ripe. Mm-hmm. And so they go through, and they may do 3 or 4 or 5 passes to like as the cherries get ripe, but they're picking when the cherries are ripe. That's how Colombia used to be. But with year-round water, there's way less cherries when it comes time to pick because they never really do a full bloom. But they've got to pick them when they're ripe. And like we were there in October and there were ripe cherries on the trees. And that's just unheard of. It's normally a spring crop. So
several months early.
Several months early or late, however you calculate.
Sure, yeah.
And they said it's basically year round. So both Jairo's team has done this and Forrest has done this, where they've actually hired, like normally it's seasonal workers because it's a seasonal job. They've hired full-time staff pickers to pick throughout the season. And they're like, because our crops aren't as big as they would normally be in a full, like in Colombia, they usually have basically a fly crop, like an early crop, and then a full crop.
Sure.
And now it's year-round fly crop, basically.
Wow.
And so they're looking at small lots, like focusing on the higher quality coffees in the smaller lots and just picking those constantly to be able to supply it. And so Forrest actually told me, hey, Matt, don't plan for a year of any one coffee. It's better for us if you buy quarterly what you need for that quarter, because we're just always sending containers in.
I almost imagine that it's going to make you as a roaster have a total shift when it comes to marketing too, right? Now you're focused on fresh new lots. Hey, check out this new, and it's going to be a smaller supply.
Yep.
Versus saying, hey, look at this. This is a great crop we're having for the
season or whatever.
Season.
Yeah. And even then, as I think about it, like one of the things they were talking about was with the like shorter season crops, they're like our focus because, and I mean, this is like the thing you don't say out loud, but because the coffee in general isn't going to be as high a quality because it never gets that stress, our focus is on fresh crop.
Sure.
And so, fresh crop is naturally going to taste a little bit better than like 9-month-old crop or 15-month-old crop. And so they're like, if we can have you focus on 0 to 3 month crop, which it's really more like 3 to 6 months because it takes time to get to us.
Right,
but
the whole process,
like that first,
shipping
But if you get that first, like at the sweet spot of it, and that's all you're getting, then the quality standard's gonna stay high.
Sure.
And so that's how they're trying to adjust for the quality.
Wow, that seems like, as what we've talked about so far, the most significant immediate impact for you as a roaster and obviously whoever's purchasing from you.
100%. Yeah, and when I was walking with Jairo, I asked him, I'm like, do you think this is just like a seasonal bubble, or do you think this is more permanent? And his response was, we're treating this as if this is the new normal.
Okay.
Because maybe it goes back to how it was, but we don't know that. And it's been enough of a consistent pattern. We have to change the way we do business as if this is the new normal.
Wow. Yeah, and wow. So if Colombia was that drastic, was it like that in Costa Rica as well?
So Costa Rica was another different thing. It's like, which
shouldn't be surprised.
It's actually one of the reasons I love that I've been able to go to multiple countries with Origin trips, and I'm looking at going to not the same 3 next year, but multiple countries again, because I feel like you just get such a broad picture of what's happening around the world in the industry that we all love. And so Costa Rica, I landed with Eden. It was like the last week of March, which normally in the last week of March, you finished picking all the cherries, and nothing's blooming. Like the trees are just kind of bare. And it was like, it's generally like when I was trying to plan the trip, everyone's like, you're coming at the worst time.
Right.
And then I land and there's flowers on the trees. And they weren't in full bloom. Like when it's full bloom and you look at a like mountain covered in coffee, it looks like it's covered in snow because the flowers are just beautiful and they're white and it's great.
Yeah.
It wasn't that, but you could see flowers on the trees.
Right.
And so we get there and I basically comment to, I can't remember if it was Perry or Carlos at the time, but I commented to one of the producers we were meeting with and I'm like, why are there flowers now? Like, it doesn't make sense to me. This seems early. And he was like, wow, good eye. Yeah, we just had our earliest rain ever. And so everything bloomed because the trees thought we were entering the rainy season, but it only rained for like a week and then it stopped. And so we don't know what's going to happen, but no one's happy.
Yeah, the uncertainty doesn't sound like a good thing for a farmer, right?
Yeah, and that was, he's like, it shouldn't be blooming now because, I mean, when you just think about the biology of it, like once a flower blooms, then the flower sheds and that turns into the fruit.
Sure.
But it's too early for it to turn into fruit. So if the real rainy season comes, it was too short to be a normal rainy season. If the real rainy season comes again and then it's not ready to flower again,
it's almost
you've
like
lost your crop.
It's like a false start. Like some of the plants go
Great
to bloom,
analogy.
but not everything else.
Yep.
The concern is that if that happens, now you're going to end up with like a quarter of your crop.
Honestly, what it probably was like 30% of the potential flowers were blooming at the time.
Yeah.
But everyone like that we talked to said that's the earliest we've ever had rain. We've never noticed rain this early in the year. It's never come. And so they were all like, this is just completely new territory.
And I have to ask, because we did for the other two, if this is something that's going to be recurring, how are they going to handle that?
They haven't. Like Perry and Carlos were actually in our shop last week.
Okay.
And I asked, like, hey, so whatever happened with the early bloom? And the response was, oh, well, no one liked that. Like, it's like, well, yeah. Yeah. So what does that mean? They're like, we don't really know yet. We're hoping for a full bloom when it comes, which is coming up in the next few weeks, but we don't really know yet. And so the anticipation or the hope is that you get a full crop. Yeah. Most likely it's going to be like a 60 to 70% crop, which is going to affect prices for sure. Back to supply and demand. Sure. If this has long-term ramifications and this starts happening, they may move to like a fly crop thing like
almost
Colombia
like
used
Colombia.
to. Like what they used to have, where it was like an early crop and then the main crop.
Wow.
But they're not staffed for that. I was actually talking to Carlos about Colombia, and I'm like, yeah, they moved away from seasonal workers, and so they've got year-round. And he's like, oh, well, that wouldn't work in Costa Rica. Like, they're seasonal and migrant, so they come to pick, and then they move further south for the next season and move further south. And so he's like, we won't have workers for that.
You can't pay them to stick around.
No, it's not. He's like, it would be economically impossible for us to do that.
Man. So it seems like one of the common themes is that there is no commonality between all these almost. It's different in each country, which maybe you shouldn't be surprised. But I mean, even though the places are maybe geographically pretty close, they're not similar as far as what they're experiencing in their rainy seasons.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the biggest surprise to me is like after I talked to Don Edwin in Guatemala, I was like, well, I know I'm doing other origin trips. I just want to start asking about this stuff because he seemed really concerned. Like, hey, if we don't have enough water, like it's not like they can go, call a water truck to bring water in. Like they either get what they get for rain or they're out. And then we get to Colombia and I start asking climate change questions and it's all about how they have all the water in the world. And I'm like, well, you should ship some of that to Guatemala.
They need groundwater, man.
And then, back to Costa Rica. I didn't even think about the climate change thing. I just thought it was weird that the flowers were blooming because I didn't expect it. And it was gorgeous. And they're like, this is not a good...
And now you have to ask the question, right? So let's bring it back to a little bit of a generality and a little closer to home maybe as far as analogies go. How do you see this impacting you as a coffee roaster, your purchasing decisions? And how do you think that's going to impact someone purchasing from you or anyone else if they're purchasing coffee for themselves?
Yeah, so I think there's even an earlier question there of like, what is my feedback to the farmers when they're making those decisions? Sure. And my feedback has been, don't lose out on quality. I know you're trying to fight this, you're trying to make these decisions, like focus on the high quality product and we'll pay for it.
Sure.
But that follows up, that's the answer to your real question is, like my buying we've shifted, and even if you look on our website, we've shifted from way fewer lower priced coffees to way more middle priced and higher priced coffees, because we've just had to. Not because there aren't lower priced coffees, but like if I'm going to support the farmers that I want to support and I'm encouraging them to focus on high quality, then I have to buy the great coffee from them. And just the stuff that might be cheaper from other countries that aren't experiencing this, I'm kind of letting that go.
It's kind of like thinking about it in maybe like a 10-year, 15-year plan rather than the next couple, as far as being able to support the people at origin. But I'm also sure part of it is the availability of the crop too, right?
Yeah.
So if you're going to buy high end, you got to make sure that you have the money for that.
Well,
right?
and I'm fostering these relationships year over year over year. And so I don't want them to go, oh man, I've got, we'll just, for argument's sake, let's say last year I could sell this much coffee for $5 a pound. And this year I've got this much coffee, but it cost me more. I have to sell this much coffee for $8 a pound. Well, as a buyer, I don't want to say, no, I'm not going to buy that for $8 a pound. I'm moving on to someone else that's buying $5 a pound. Then they go out of business, and these relationships I have are gone. Like, I need to nurture those relationships, help them focus, encourage them to focus on quality and the things that they can control, and then help support them.
If you were going to talk to somebody who is more of a personal buyer, someone's roasting at home or supporting local coffee shops and they're interested in specialty, what would you say to them is the major impact for them?
For them, I think the impact in the coffee shop in America is going to be you're going to have a wider spread between low quality coffee shops and high quality coffee shops where you may not be able to taste the difference. It's going to be more drastic. So people that are focusing on a price point it's going to taste worse. People that are focusing on, hey, I just want great coffee, it's going to cost a lot more.
Gotcha.
And so to the consumer, I'm going to say, if you can taste it, pay for it. Like it's, which it seems like a sales pitch, like, oh, buy expensive coffee. But it's like, we're trying to support a moving economy. We're trying to support these people who it's their livelihoods, and they're being impacted. Like that's where climate change is impacting them.
Pun intended, help them weather the storm. Right?
Exactly.
Farmers are experiencing a lot of uncertainty around how much recent weather changes will impact coffee and for how long. But there is concern across the board, and it's definitely something Sagebrush intends to keep a close eye on, as it has the potential to impact our coffee purchasing decisions for the next few years. Do you see the recent climate impact in Latin America changing your coffee purchasing decisions? If you were Matt, what would you say to farmers at origin? Let us know in the comments below.